Okay, before you get started, since Brian's not here, I'm going to gavel the meeting to order and then conduct an election for acting chair. And then I'll have one administrative item before we get started. It's a real quick rubber stamping kind of thing. Okay, we'll get started. It's 7:11 on the evening of July 21, 2021. My name is Stephen Bachmiller. I'm the zoning administrator for the city of Hagerstown. This is the regularly scheduled monthly meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Since our chairman is absent, our protocol sets that staff will conduct an election amongst the members in attendance for an acting chair to preside over the meeting for this particular meeting. So with that, I'll open the floor to nominations.
I would like to nominate James Stauffer as the acting chairman.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations amongst the four of you? With that, we'll close the nominations. Those in favor of Mr. Stauffer signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed in like manner. Congratulations, Mr. Acting Chairman.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, we do have one administrative item that we need to do prior to getting started. We have temporary rules of procedure that are in place due to the COVID emergency. They were specifically written to expire 45 days after the mayor rescinded the city's state of emergency. That 45-day period expired around Independence Day. So technically those provisions for operating under Zoom, which we have one of our members currently in attendance, as this provision disappeared, essentially, we can't conduct meetings using Zoom. However, there's nothing to say that you all cannot adopt revised rules of procedure, and staff would recommend that you simply make a simple motion to extend that period through August 30th. And that way, because we're going to have later in this meeting a conversation about how you want to move forward with Zoom and things like that in the post-COVID world, where it's not an emergency provision, so we can make revisions. But it'll get us through this meeting, and if necessary, the next one.
So with that, I'll make a motion that we extend the emergency procedures due to COVID-19 pandemic emergency through the period of August 30th of 2021.
I'll second that.
So based on that, anybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
I think Aaron was in favor. I think he was a little delayed on that, correct?
I was, yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize it's muted.
Okay, so it's 4 no in
So
favor.
4 to 0.
Okay, so we now are operating under rules that allow Mr. Smith to participate
Okay.
via electronic platform.
All right. So with that, we're opening up the meeting. First, I'm James Stauffer. I am the acting chair tonight. I apologize. I am losing my voice already before I got here, so I apologize for that. With me to my right is Greg Deck. To my left is Laura Lowry, and via Zoom is Aaron Smith. Make up the members of the board that are present tonight. Also with us, Stephen Bachmiller, who is the zoning administrator for the city, and joining us for the first time is Amy, I think it's Hott. Amy Hott, who's acting as the secretary for us tonight. So welcome, Amy. With that, talk about the procedures. First, the function of the board. The decisions and cases heard tonight are based on general and specific criteria as enumerated in the Land Management Code. This is an administrative procedure. So as such, will be conducted just as if it were a court of law, except that we're not follow strictly the rules of evidence. Everyone who wishes to be heard on a particular case will be heard, and each of these cases will be heard in the order that they're filed with the board. We do have a single case tonight. The procedure we'll follow will be we'll hear first the applicant, then any witnesses for, and then any witnesses in opposition. Then, if necessary, any final remarks from the applicant, and then we'll take these under advisement and give you a decision within 45 days. We will stay and make our decision tonight. You're welcome to stay and listen to that during our deliberations, but the actual formal decision we make will be in writing. You'll receive it within 45 days. So you won't be able to necessarily go and act on what we decide tonight to get that in writing from us. You do have a right to appeal within 30 days of the date of the written decision. So once that's been issued and delivered, you can appeal. Any party who participated in the hearing and is aggrieved by the decision may appeal to the circuit court. This is the 30 days after the date of decision and order of the opinion, not the date of the hearing. So it's 30 days from when you receive that. The rules we have are really just two. First one is the only remarks that we will consider are those given from the witness chair under oath, and we ask you confine the remarks to only things pertinent to the case at hand. So with that, we'll call the first case, which is case 0-2021-08, which is a request for a variance to adjust fencing. And Mr. Buckmiller, if you'd like to read that in for us.
Folks, if you want to step up to the table there. Okay, this is case Z 2021-08. The applicants are Leonard and Beatrice Morel. Property is located in the RMOD, Residential Moderate Density Zoning District. The property is located at 852 Snyder Avenue, which is on the corner of Nolan Drive. There's two requests tonight. One is a variance to increase the maximum 4-foot open construction height limitation for a fence in a front yard from 4 feet to 6 feet for a privacy fence, and a variance to increase the height of a fence in a front yard within 25 feet of an intersection from 3 feet to 6 feet in order to construct the same privacy fence. This application is being made for the reasons that under Article 4, Section K1B, the maximum permitted height of a fence in front yards forward of the rear face of a house is 4 feet and of open construction. Also, K1A limits the height of fences within 25 feet of an intersection to 3 feet. And I note that requirements amended were amended effective June 24th. There was some amendment to the zoning ordinance that impacts this, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail momentarily. Deadline for written decision is September 4th, 2021. On June 24th, certain zoning amendments to the zoning ordinance took effect. One is that front yard fences, which previously were limited to 3 feet in height, are now limited to 4 feet in height. The mayor and council adopted an ordinance to increase that by a foot. So if this was a month ago, they would be applying for a variance to increase the height from 3 feet to 6 feet. Now it's 4 feet to 6 feet because 4 feet is now permitted. Also, there was a provision in the ordinance that said if you have a side yard or a side street or a rear street, and that side street or rear street is a higher classification on the transportation map, then it's still treated as a front yard. Typically, rear yards, they have higher permitted fences. However, and we also, the ordinance was written where it also allows it if your corner lot, the part of your backyard that's along the side street. However, there was provisions in it that says if the side street is a higher classification than your main street, then the front still applies. That was amended to where it only applied if it's major collectors or higher. Minor collector roads do not apply. Nolan is a minor collector. So if this was a month ago, on the drawing that I provided showing you the affected section of the fence and how it is affected, if this was a month ago, that red line would extend all the way over to the rear corner and then up into their backyard. But now rear yard fences, everything behind the rear face of the house, as long as it's the side street is a same classification or no higher than a minor collector, then the rear yard regulations now apply, whereas before they didn't. So before they would be applying for more variance, both in the height of the fence and also in this rear corner area, which is now actually permitted up to 6 feet. So that's why I took the extra step of showing, producing this drawing, showing the red line of what is the area that is the affected part of the fence as far as this application, because it is a little bit different than it would have been 4 weeks ago. For variance, you have the 6 criteria in the ordinance, that the applicant needs to demonstrate they meet. The first is unique condition of property. The applicant will need to demonstrate to the board satisfaction compliance with this. Staff will note the house was constructed facing Snyder Avenue and the architectural rear amounts to a narrow side yard as viewed from Nolan Drive. Most of the traditional rear yard type uses commonly found on residential properties are found on this property in the open area between the side of the house and Nolan Drive. According to air photos, a pool has been located on this property at the current location for many years, I believe 20 or more, and I'm sure the applicant will have more detail on that. Second is minimum necessary to afford relief. The applicant will need to demonstrate to the board's satisfaction that they comply with this. The applicant proposes to fence the entire front yard as it appears from Nolan Drive up to the right-of-way of Snyder Avenue. The applicant will need to demonstrate to the board how doing so meets this requirement, and fencing only enough yard to enclose the pool somehow does not overcome the site's unusual conditions. Criteria 3, compliance would preclude common use. The applicant would need to demonstrate to the board's satisfaction compliance with subsection 3. The applicant will need to demonstrate how fencing only the portion of the yard to the rear and side of the house and sufficiently forward of the front face of the house to enclose the pool would preclude common use of the property. Number 4, no special privilege. They need to demonstrate that granting the variance would not convey them special privilege that is not available to other property owners or citizens. 5, request is not a self-created hardship. They'll need to demonstrate to the board's satisfaction that it's not a self-created hardship. And then 6, that it's consistent with the intent of the ordinance. Again, they'll need to to demonstrate to you that it is consistent with, that their request is consistent with the intent of the ordinance. Under conditions of approval, staff recommends a condition that the existing chain link fence be removed, including that area adjacent to Snyder Avenue, should the board grant a reduced variance that would leave the chain link fence outside of the new privacy fence enclosure. Use variances are prohibited, but that's not applicable here. This is a fence, it's a structure, so that particular provision doesn't apply. Recommendations submitted by boards. The Planning Commission had no comment. The Historic District Commission is not applicable. The Board of Traffic and Parking did not meet. They had quorum issues. It was on their agenda to discuss, but they didn't meet, so they have no recommendation to you on this. That's what you have. And again, I provided you the drawing showing you in red the area of the fence that's subject to the requested variance.
Thank you very much. So with that, if you're the applicant, if I can get you to stand for a moment and raise your right hand. And then do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Thank you much. You may be seated. So with that, can you start off by walking us through your proposal and what you're looking to do?
Yeah, so what I'm not normally used to speaking, so I took notes, I wrote notes. Basically, first of all, thank you for allowing me to state my case. I appreciate that. And I know it came really fast because we've been trying to get the fence installed for some time. First permit was denied. I was never informed that it was denied. So we've been in the house, my wife has been in the house since 1990 and myself since 1992. What we're referring to as my front yard, the city has always recognized as my backyard. We applied for a permit initially to put up a 4-foot fence. And at the time, that was back in 1990, we put up a 4-foot chain link fence surrounding our backyard. We were told that we had to keep it 10 feet off of Nolan Drive, 6 feet off of Snyder Avenue, and off of the property line to the rear. We did that. In 1997, we applied for a permit to install a pool. We had now, because you're not allowed to put a swimming pool in a front yard, we did not have a variance to put the pool in. The permit was granted because it was our backyard. When we installed the newer pool, and that was just 3 years ago, there was no variance needed. We did have to apply for a new permit because we did increase the size of it. We had to keep the setback lines for a backyard for that particular pool to go in. So when we applied for replacing our current 4-foot chain link fence, it's been there for 20 years. I did not believe that we would need to get a variance to replace an existing fence in a backyard to a 6-foot fence. I've taken pictures for everybody that shows how the fence is actually laid out. Currently, the fence is 6 feet off of Snyder Avenue. It's 10 feet off of Nolan Drive. And if you pull up to that stop sign, a 6-foot privacy fence actually would not obstruct anybody's view. Now, in 1955, when the house was built, for some reason, somebody in their infinite wisdom decided that they were going to place it so that it would be in conjunction with the houses on Virginia Avenue. So my front yard is actually not fenced. I do have a sidewalk in the front. I do have 2 walkways that go up to the 2 front doors out front, and that's not fenced. If you look at the one picture that I provided, it shows looking at the house, the left-hand side of the house, and where the front yard is open. The fence at that time, when it was installed, was actually considered going up to the back of the house. So my house has always been, that portion of the yard has always been considered by the city. And even when I applied for the new permit for the pool, the girl in the permit office said, well, that is your backyard. So I'm hoping that the city can still continue to maintain the fact that that is my backyard. I don't think I'm asking for any special consideration by having a privacy fence put up. With the new, and when I talked to the girl, I believe she's retired now, about the fence going in, where we wanted to put the fence along what's the actual side yard, which faces the houses on Nolan Drive, because it's so small, we wanted the privacy fence to run that whole length down along Nolan Drive, and it's approximately 60 feet to the back of the house on Snyder Avenue. So what he has drawn is actually correct, but that has always been known as the backyard for every permit that we've ever had to have done.
Just a question of procedure. Since it's referencing photos, but we already have the photos, do we need to put those photos in evidence?
Yes.
So if you would like to submit those photos, we can get those put in evidence as part of this. If you want to hand those to.
Oh, yeah. I thought that's why I gave 9 copies.
Actually, how's about if you all have a copy of your application, we'll just make
Yes, we
references
do.
to them.
I have them on the computer. You can have these.
How many of them do we got? We got an aerial photo.
Yeah, we have an aerial photo that shows how the house actually sits in conjunction with every other house in the area. It doesn't sit in accordance to any of the houses on Nolan Drive, and it doesn't sit in accordance with any of the houses on Snyder Avenue. It actually sits in accordance with the houses on Virginia Avenue. Why they did that is beyond me. I mean, somebody should have probably stopped them from doing that in 1955.
There's 8 photographs here. So if you want to mark them one, I'll give you a separate copy. We'll keep one for the record with the marked up exhibits.
Okay.
And if you want to mark them, exhibits 1 through 8.
Okay. Yeah. I can do that later. I'll do it right now.
We can do it later.
I think I wrote on them when I made, I don't know, did I wrote on them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll do that
I
shortly.
mean, you can have these if you want.
That's fine. We use these. Thank you very
Okay.
much. Okay. Anything else you want to share with us at this point?
I think that's it. I mean, I don't understand why it's being considered a front yard now, when it's always previously been a backyard. And, I'm not, the last thing I want to do is obstruct, cause an accident. I don't want to cause an accident. So I have made sure that when you pull out down there, you can see both ways. It is a low traffic area. I mean, hate to say it, but a lot of times the snowplow doesn't even get us. I've plowed our road out many times. Just because they seem to forget it. And I guess it's just because it's an L-shaped street. It's just a small one. It almost looks like a dead end, so I don't know. But it is a low traffic area. Nolan Drive, I think sometimes can be a little busier. But here lately, I'd say the traffic on Nolan Drive is probably a lot less than what it had been. So I would like to, actually have it approved. So that way we can have quiet enjoyment, not have to worry about people riding by, making comments, throwing things at us, throwing things in the pool, stuff like that.
So we have a couple questions for you, obviously.
Sure.
So first thing I want to talk about is, obviously you've stated earlier, the fence is something that, the existing fence is something that was put in by you previously.
Yes, it
so
was
just took
installed by my father-in-law.
Just curious, the type of fence you're talking about putting in now to replace the chain link. Can you
I'm
just-
sorry.
The type of fence you're looking to put in now to
It's a
replace.
vinyl fence. It's a
Okay.
vinyl 6-foot privacy fence.
And solid slat where you can't see through it, or is there openings?
Correct. You can't see through it. There's no fancy thing up at the top. 'Cause I wanted to make sure that it just stayed level, no fancy posts on it. So it was just one level fence the whole way around.
So the unique conditions of the property are basically, based on your testimony, the placement of the house on the property and the direction in which it faces both streets, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it faces Virginia Avenue. All the houses on Snyder Avenue face Snyder, and all the houses on Nolan face Nolan.
So if you were to put a fence in instead that followed the way the code is written, what would that impact from your enjoyment of the property? What would be the impact to you?
Well, I believe we would still have the same issues that we're having at this point, which is, unfortunately, people like to jump the fence, even though there's no trespassing signs. And unfortunately, we also do have 2 big dogs. They help, but they're not out at nighttime. And I think, having it so that our yard is more secure, because the last thing I want to see is somebody jump the fence and drown, because then I'm responsible.
And you have had people jump the fence? and
Oh, yeah.
get in the pool? Okay, interesting.
Because we have the gates locked, and they're also the self-closing latches like they're supposed to. I mean, we did everything with permits. We did it exactly the way the city told us to. And unfortunately, we live in a society today where people just,
Lack of respect at times,
Yeah.
I guess, right? Okay, gotcha. Other board members, questions you want to ask?
Yes, I believe I would, I guess we would call it your Exhibit 8 that shows the stop sign.
yes,
I rode by there yesterday. And if we increase that, now, you're talking about placing the new fence.
exactly where the old fence is.
Sir, if you increase that to 6 feet, you will obscure that stop sign.
I'd be willing to move it.
And yes, I would say, I agree with you. You have, right now, plenty of visibility, but you also have a chain link fence that you can see through. If you raise that to 6 feet, solid fence, I'm not sure you would have the same visibility as you exit Snyder
Most people pull down to the curb.
past the
They don't
stop sign.
stop at the stop sign. They pull down at the curb. Because if you stop at the stop sign, you can't see completely on Nolan Drive anyway, when you're looking toward Virginia Avenue.
You can't see to the left, you could probably see to the
Correct.
right now.
You can see to the right, but you can't see to the left.
I agree. But you would have to agree that you will, at the current location, obscure that stop sign.
Well, the amount that it would obscure the lower right corner of the stop sign. because I went out and measured it. So it would obscure the lower right corner, and I knew that was probably going to be an issue. And that's when I said, you know what, I'll dig it up and move it myself and put it over on the other side where people can see it better. And no offense, not to a lot of people that don't live on that road, they come through there, pay attention to that stop sign.
I think the challenge is we have to take into account that where the stop sign
It is
is
a
and what the
stop
legal
sign,
requirements of
right.
using the stop sign, it will be considered, it could be partially blocked, which will create a potential traffic issue for us within the community. Other questions, Greg or Laura?
Not at this time.
Right.
You've addressed.
Aaron, any questions?
Nope, that's what I was gonna question as well.
For the benefit of our newer members, just for the record, staff does not make recommendations to approve or deny. There's, in our staff report, we don't have that. All we do is identify the criteria that you need to evaluate. And if there's any issues that require specific consideration or attention in your deliberations, we will mention them. That's what we did here.
I don't think I have any other questions. If nobody else does, then well, thank you for your testimony, and you can step back. And is there anybody else that wants to testify on your behalf? Oh, feel free to come up. You can come up to the table, please.
I'm Donna Milburn. I live 17 Thunder Avenue. I lived there for 19 years.
If you would raise your right hand for me, and do you solemnly promise and declare under oath, I'm sorry, let me start over again. Do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, thank you. You may have a seat.
Thank you.
And what was your address again, please?
17 Snyder Avenue. I'm right across from Renee house.
Thank you.
His backyard and my backyard are right across the baby.
Got it.
When I moved there 19 years ago, these folks had use of the backyard, and it was the backyard. That's what it was used for. The front yard was the front yard, so you get your newspaper there and sundries going in and out of the house. I don't think I've ever seen them go into the backyard other than to use their pool or to have a picnic and that kind of thing. We do live in that area, which is a very destructive area. We have problems with people stealing stuff. I personally I also have a pool in my backyard, and we have the gate onto the yard. Unfortunately, kids seem to think it's real big kids to take their dogs and turn them loose in my yard. Unfortunately, it's at night, and I'm 75, my husband's 80, so we don't hear things a lot of times. It's just a really destructive area. It's gone downhill since I moved there. Also, the other thing that confused me was, as I said, I face his yard. Well, down below me, the next 4 houses, their yards in the back are their backyards, and their yards in front of the front yard. So I just was confused as to why that was such a mess up, but I think I understand a little better.
Just point of clarity, let me ask, you said you're the neighbor. Would this be your house here? Or have the right house?
I think so.
Just trying to make sure I understand exactly what we're talking about placement wise.
Yeah, I'm kind of like beside Rennie's house. So I don't blame him for wanting to put up a privacy fence. My husband and I were talking about it, just to stop people throwing stuff in my pool. They think it's real exciting to park outside of my fence and do whatever they're doing, and then when they're done with their liquor, they sweep it over the fence and go to the pool. So I don't blame him. You need to protect your people, your home, your happiness, so to speak. So I just came to support them and to try to make you guys understand that it has been used accordingly for 19 years that I can attest to.
Okay.
So I just think it's kind of odd that came up with a problem now. So, if you don't mind me stepping in, but I I just think it's a shame that they have to go through all this to prove that that's their backyard.
Appreciate your testimony. Does anybody have any questions? No? Aaron, any questions?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it. You can return back to your seat.
Okay, thank you very much for letting.
Sorry,
me
did you,
speak.
actually, I'm sorry, we do have a question.
Oh, okay, sure.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Mr. Morel, okay. I'm sorry, you can go ahead and go back to your seat. Thank you very much. A little confusion.
I'm dismissed?
Yeah. Anybody else wants to testify on behalf at this point? And, okay, and obviously nobody in attendance to argue the other side. Can we ask Mr. Morel to come back up to the chair for a minute? And remember, you're still under oath at the moment?
Mr. Morel, I do understand your need for some privacy. We all need a little privacy from time to time, especially when you're out enjoying your backyard or your front yard, whichever it may be. You know, I'd like to work with you here a little bit, but I'm really concerned with that fence, as you said you would replace it exactly where that chain link is. What harm would it be to move that fence inward?
It would depend on how far inward, because the swimming pool has to be so far away from that side. And that's why when we did the swimming pool, when we got the permit to do it, we had to be so many feet away from that portion of the fence. We had to be so many feet away from that side, so many feet away from this side, and so many feet away from.
Well, it appears you have quite a bit of clearance there now.
If I remember correctly, I think we had an additional 4 feet. You know, I guess it would depend on, because that section of the yard right there, when we do have gatherings, that's where we usually put up our cornhole boards. And that's what we use. We use the whole backyard. We really do. You know, and initially, I mean, at the stop sign, and I even told my wife this, even for the sake of mowing, if you would permit it, and I had to move that fence along Snyder 1 foot over, I would do that. Because then I wouldn't have to push mow, I could just go ahead and use the riding mower. Getting older, you know.
I understand. What if you eliminated that 90 and put an angle on it at that point? Would you be agreeable to that?
I don't think that would look very appealing. I mean, aesthetically, you know, I guess it would depend on how, you know, again, I guess it would depend on how far, how big. I mean, when I'm looking at, because I saw the diagram on here, and it looked like the recommendation was 25 feet that way and 25 feet that way. So the fence along the Snyder Avenue side is 62 feet. So if we take 25 feet from the Snyder Avenue side, and then we take 25 feet from the Nolan side, which is 80 feet, that's going to leave a big chunk of corner that's going to be real close to that, where the pool comes around.
Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't, you know, if we're talking a foot to 2 foot on that corner, I don't think I would have an issue with that. But when I'm looking at 25, of losing 25 feet, and trying to keep everything where it's still usable, that's a lot.
I think what Greg's asking for, or Mr. Tuck is asking for, is if your request was modified slightly to come down a few feet from the corner and come across at an angle. So you went back, I'm making up a number, don't hold me to this, 2 to 3 feet back on the side facing the stop sign and cut across diagonally to meet the other side as a slight revision to what you're asking for approval for. That does help with the stop sign issue potentially, I think is what you're
Right.
trying to get to.
That's what I'm
Because
trying to
the
get.
safety concern of the stop sign is one of the biggest concerns we would have to talk about here is just you're offering, you're saying yes to a variance, whether it's going to create a safety issue for the community is a challenge for us.
Mhm.
So if that was something that was,
So if I understand the question, it would be replacing the existing fence on the Snyder Avenue side, roughly 54 feet down, and then at an angle to where it would be roughly 78 feet long,
What,
70 or 77 feet long.
yeah, I can,
Suggesting is that you just come in a couple of feet here.
Yeah, and I'd be fine with that.
away from the,
Yeah.
stop sign.
I think even if you looked at your chain link fence at the corner post, if you went back to the next post on Snyder and back to the next post on Nolan, that would not take a lot away from your yard.
Well, each one of those posts,
6 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet,
actually, I think they're 12
8.
feet.
really?
I'm thinking they're probably about 8 feet apart. is my
8
guess.
feet, maybe.
Well, let's see here. 8.
It's a 4-foot tall fence. It looks like a section of that is 2 squares wide.
All right, so they're, yeah, okay, so they're about 8 foot in between.
Okay. Would you lose too much of a yard if you did that?
If we went from where that post is, looking at the picture with the stop sign, if we went from where that post is over to the other post,
The triangle
it would be
with 2 8-foot long signs, it's about 32 square feet.
Which
8
is,
by 8 is
which is,
64
which
by
is very
2
little,
for a triangle is 32 square feet.
which is very little, really.
I wish for a slightly better shot of this to see what the post really was.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It makes sense,
It could be an option.
but, without-
Well, I know that the new section of fencing, each section, from my understanding, they're gonna be, the main posts are gonna be 6 feet apart. So if we came along on the Nolan side and stopped 6 feet away from that corner post, and then put up that piece from there at an angle to the other, which would roughly give, I guess, 3 feet each side. Is that doable? Because each piece is gonna be 6 feet, like right now they're 8 feet. I think each section of the new piece is going to be 6, instead of having to come straight to that corner, then that piece will come out, and then that piece that instead of going to the corner and then having another piece is actually gonna save me a little bit because I'm just gonna run one piece.
Diagonal, basically.
Diagonal.
Diagonal between the two.
Yeah.
We can't answer your question yes or no, but we can say it's something we could consider. If-
Okay.
If you'd be willing to consider, we could consider it as.
Yeah, yeah,
something.
Thank you.
it was like a refund to me.
Any other follow-up questions since we have Ms. Morrell back on the stand? Okay, thank you again. Appreciate you coming back up. So with nobody else present to testify for or against, I guess at this point we can close testimony on this, and with no other cases, we could move into deliberations. So you're welcome to stay while we talk, or leave, and you will get the documentation from us within 45 days.
Kinda like those. Okay, I was gonna say, I kind of like no sooner than that. I think they've already applied for the permit again, but they didn't do it the way I told them to do it.
And we you have your fence permit application actually in the case file here.
Well, I think he did it for the whole thing. I asked him to do it where we knew we were allowed to put it for now, which was along that backside. 30 feet over, 40 feet over on.
Oh, okay, I'll check into that. But I'm the one who drafts the decision. Once they tell me what their decision is, and I don't plan on waiting 45 days to do it. It'll be done within a week.
Okay, sounds good to me. We won't.
As a minimum, that would be
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, first, I did number the exhibits, if you'd like those now.
You can just stick it in the official file there.
Okay, all right. Hold on. All right, so let's go through the conditions, right? So the first item is unique condition of the property. I mean, obviously, the property is laid out to some degree differently than the surrounding properties. The position of the house, position of the property with the streets around it, and having this short cut of a street. So there is a unique condition to the property. And obviously some misinterpretation potentially in the past about what was considered a rear yard or not, regardless of who made that misinterpretation. Their understanding is that based on the layout of the property, the backyard, or the rear yard as they referred to it, is the one that faces Nolan, which is not what the code would represent, right? So based on the fact that they've put the fence in themselves, based on the fact the property, they bought it with the house there, I think there's a unique condition there. And if you guys would agree to disagree, any comments on whether that we do think that is or isn't a unique condition?
I would agree that it's probably the only way that house could have been laid out on that lot, if you look at that lot.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other properties are laid out slightly differently with narrower property marks, but the houses are much more narrow too. So the design of the house itself could not have fit on the property any other way.
It couldn't have faced Nolan, not on that lot.
So would we all agree that there is a unique condition
Well,
in place or not?
Yep, I agree.
I agree.
So then the next is the request the minimum necessary to afford relief? I would argue that it's not. I would argue that what's being requested, there are some accommodations they could make in what they're trying to do that would help make it more palatable to do it. I think, I guess where I'm torn at is ultimately, while they have while the community area that they're in has some challenges, and putting in the larger, higher fence would help them with that. Putting in the lower fence within the constraints of what the code says doesn't preclude them from using the property. But if they do want to do something different that would give them more security in the property, I think there has to be an accommodation made that they seem like they're willing to make to allow for the safety of using that stop sign and being able to see both directions, not just one direction, especially if you're trying to come out and make a turn across lanes of traffic. So based on what their statements are of the usage they want to continue to have, that they've enjoyed for a period of nearly 20 years, is what they're asking for, the minimum necessary for the relief that they need.
My opinion is that is it reasonably necessary? I would say so. I mean, I don't think it's, I think it's pretty reasonable to have privacy to your backyard and to a pool. And it does, I have a 6-foot privacy fence in my backyard. And I know that, it's really helped me with my safety, my privacy. So in my opinion, it's reasonably necessary.
I would also say the applicant actually made a statement kind of that hurts him a little bit, but Nolan Drive does have a significant amount of traffic going by. It is an area where there's a lot of traffic that stops along that road too at times, specifically in times of the evening. So a fence, a higher fence with no visible way to see through into the yard does give them an advantage of safety and privacy and noise reduction.
Right.
I would agree on the fence itself, but we're talking about minimum necessary, okay? And I don't think what they're requesting is the minimum necessary. They could move that fence in, all right, put the angle on as we discussed, and still give themselves relief.
I don't disagree.
Just so I'm understanding clearly, your concern is the angle at the intersection or the fencing of the entire back?
Well,
backyard?
you know, I'm concerned here. I mean, we have an ordinance that I don't want to open ourselves up for future concern here, you know, where that's quite a variance that we're being requested to approve.
Fencing and two entire, what amounts to
Yeah.
yards.
Right.
And my comment to your question would be that I think it's twofold. One is if we were to entertain saying, yes, they could have the variance, then there's a safety issue that creates. So if we decide no, that we don't want to allow the variance, then the safety issue is not a non-issue. So the second one is only an issue because of the first one, based on our decision. Right, so I think that's the consideration.
I don't know what to say. You know, is it just a hearsay from Mr. Morel about past approval? I mean, he has a fence there now, so he got approval for a fence.
So fence regulations have changed over the years. I don't know the zoning or the permit history of that particular fence.
And that would not be in this file, right? The
So it
permits.
would not be in that file.
Correct.
And certainly the fence that's there now does not meet the current ordinance.
That is correct. I'm not exactly sure how it got there, depending on when it got built. I think he said that fence was built in the 90s.
He said, I believe it was 92, was shortly after he
Mhm.
was residence.
In good shape for being 30-year-old fence. I don't know if we would still have anything in our file over the construction of a fence from 30 years ago. It's possible. If you want to recess for a few minutes, I could run up and check the building permit file and see if there's anything there, and you could just reopen it to accept that record into the record if you want.
So
Want me to
let's
do that?
take a short recess and if you could talk
Take 5
about it.
minutes.
Okay.
What's
Thank
the
you.
address on this again? 850.
I don't want to open the bag of lunch.
And this is one of the many houses in the area that have two front streets, right? The lots.
Well,
of
every corner lot.
But specifically where the layout of the property also is oddly shaped, it gives them, you know, there are lots of corner lots where the back is truly behind the house from the way the house faces the street or the main door.
This is, but that's not Avenue. Is just a upgraded alley when you look at it.
You can probably find dozens of situations of this similar layout within the city.
Even though there might be a few other homes on that street, maybe I shouldn't say it like that. Aerial. Yeah, I guess I mean, this part of it, basically upgraded out.
As I'm trying to place it, is this the ice cream place here?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
it, the Big Dipper or something like that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I talk quietly all the time. I apologize. Amy might have to yell at me about that. Debbie used to yell at me about not talking loudly. So you might have to remind me once in a while to talk loudly as I'm doing this. I think what we were trying to, I apologize, was just, there's got to be a number of houses, probably a couple dozen houses in communities within the city limit that have a single corner lot that is this way. I know we've talked about at least one before since I've been on the board, where the way the house was placed makes sense based on the size of the house, size of the lot. Obviously, they consider the front when the sidewalk comes out. But
But when you look at it, what you would consider the side based on the layout is what they consider the rear based on the layout of the property. It's just odd. So if we if we approve the variance, there are dozens and dozens of properties that would be able to come back and use this as their evidence to do the same thing.
Plus, I did not see in the general area any other front yard fences, and we have to consider that a front yard fence.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And it's odd. It's not, the fact that Snyder Avenue exists like that is just weird. I mean, that's an odd. I don't know what would have been the thought process behind designing that originally. But obviously Snyder Avenue goes back, before I was born, I'm sure. It's been there as long as,
The house was built in 1950.
yeah. Well before my time.
Different times back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably less.
When you look at, shit, I lost my place. I mean, Jim, if you read, well, really,
You're talking K1, the K1 section?
yeah. And there's supposed to be an open construction.
And that's what I was curious about, the way it reads,
Right.
the spaces between the pickets being at least 1.5 inch wide.
It would have to be a picket fence.
Right, according to them.
Yeah.
You know, but- Yeah. I missed that part.
So,
Could not find the files in our filing system. I don't know if they're out or what. Or just if the permits were ever applied for, but he said that he did. I can't believe you would say something did happen. So my guess is just somebody's got the file out. I don't know where it is.
Thank you for looking. So with that, let's end the recess and go back into deliberations. So I think the couple of comments we need to take into account is minimum necessary to afford relief. Not sure that it is. It would appear to be that there are multiple other options could be done to still give them privacy by placing the fence within the confines of what the code says is allowed. I think also what they proposed, as we pointed out, what they proposed not only isn't necessarily the isn't the minimum necessary. It also doesn't actually meet the design requirements. They're talking about a solid slab fence versus a picket fence, which is what is actually referenced within the code. We require the picket fence, so he would have to redesign the intended fence that they're talking about putting on the property. So let's go to the third item. So compliance would preclude common use. I don't think, in my opinion, based on the layout and the placement that the fence could sit in and the type of fence that would be placed on the property, it would necessarily preclude common use. I do think there's still a concern, though, that if he did put in a picket fence versus the slab side fence he's talking about, that it does preclude him obtaining the safety and noise reduction benefits that he's talked about. So there is a concern that the compliance of that portion would prevent a common use of the property potentially enjoyed by other people with a similar issue. How you feel about that?
I didn't quite grasp where you're going.
Sorry. The compliance, the statement is, would the compliance preclude common use afforded by other people with a similar condition? To be in compliance, it would have to be relocated to the positions that are required based on the code, and would also have to be made of a different material. It would have to be a picket versus a slab side. The common use, you would argue, would potentially be, as he did, it's a safety issue and it is a noise issue that other people would be able to deal with by putting a fence in if he had the variance to match the type of fence that they would be able to put in if they truly had a side yard. So there is, his compliance would preclude common use from those two pieces potentially. The safety aspect of his backyard and the noise reduction from the flow of traffic at the street. I'm not sure that that is necessarily.
No, I agree. If we're saying that this is a front yard, I mean, do we have the levity to call this anything but a front yard?
I don't think that's within our ability to define.
The ordinance defines these spaces as front yards. They may be used, practically speaking, as their rear yard. But as far as the ordinance goes, it defines any public street right of way, including the one that may run across the back of somebody's property, as a front yard for the purposes of fences. To give you an example, there's houses, if you head up Potomac Avenue and you make a right-hand turn on Eastern Boulevard, there's about 4 or 5 houses there on the right that front onto, what is it, Neely or whatever, or Muller, or whatever the subdivision street is there, but their backyards are fronted on Eastern Boulevard. So you have subdivision street, Eastern Boulevard. That Eastern Boulevard, that property has 2 fronts, and the corner lot has 2 fronts. We have built-in provisions in the ordinance that allows exceptions for the fencing situation when you have through lots or rear yard or corner lots to be able to fence your entire backyard. That's why, and I'm trying not to testify here, I'm just trying to give you the information of what the code is. That's why I didn't highlight in red this portion of the yard, because basically anything behind the rear face of the house for the purposes of fence, regardless of if it's an adjoining property or an adjacent street, is allowed to go up to 6 feet tall, unless the adjacent street is a major collector or higher, which doesn't even apply in this case. Our fence regulations are a bit obtuse, I will say that, but it's necessary because there's so many unique circumstances that they have to be obtuse.
Correct.
But if, let's just say this pool wasn't there, practically speaking, they could go to the rear corner of the house and run a privacy fence over to Nolan Drive, back to the back property line, and then across the adjacent property, and that's fine, because they're fencing what is perceived as the typical rear yard, which in this case isn't much of a yard because it's more like a side yard. But so that's why that area is not highlighted in red, because you could do a 6-foot fence in that area tomorrow, getting a permit. It's when it starts getting forward to the rear face of the house, then it goes back into being a front yard for the purposes of the fence.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so thoughts on including common use?
that it would preclude. But
by declining the variance, by saying no to the variance, it would. Okay. I think I would agree. Aaron, comments?
Yeah, I agree.
So fourth one is no special purpose, so it needs to demonstrate the board satisfaction, compliance with the section. Does it give them a special purpose? I don't.
Unique condition has, if you find a unique condition, that typically voids this.
Right.
So if you're finding a unique condition, that there's something unique about the property, then they're not getting special privilege.
I seem to be missing that page with the red mark. You're talking, so they could potentially do 6 foot across Nolan, is what you're saying?
no, not across no.
Or they're saying across, you're saying across Snyder? Okay, perfect. I understand now. Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so is it a self-created hardship? Is the next question. I don't believe it's a self-created hardship. The property was designed before either occupant was a resident of the house. Goes back many years before that. Layout, structure, all those things. I think that's a pretty easy one, that it's not a self-created hardship. We everybody agree with that?
I agree.
I agree.
Right, and then is the variance going to be still consistent with the intent of the ordinance? Based on the statements here, I would say it's not.
No, I would agree.
I think it's a challenge in that it doesn't look like it fits the neighborhood. It creates a issue of safety with the stop sign placement. It really doesn't seem to be consistent with what the intent has been with the ordinance.
I agree. I think they have other options.
So I guess the first thing, just before we actually make a motion, I mean, do we believe the motion would be a for or an against? Because if we believe it's going to be a for, we also have some conditions to talk about. So are there, if any of us are thinking no, we're going to vote no, are there conditions that we could put in place or ask we put in place that would allow us to change our opinion to be a yes?
I think we're going way outside of the ordinance. I mean, even the fencing on Snyder, if that's a front yard, is not allowed to be solid. Not allowed to be 6 feet.
Your thoughts?
Well, I understand where you're coming from. However, the way it's classified, as you said, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, the way it's classified where that street, it's not a major, it's not considered a major. So therefore, being a minor, you said that it could be thought of as a rear rather than a front.
Behind the rear face of the house,
Behind the, okay,
Which goes back
which is the
to,
area that's not highlighted in red on the
which
drawing.
is not highlighted, okay.
Prior to a month ago, that entire yard, everything between the house and Nolan would essentially be highlighted in red. But because the area that's behind the rear face of the architectural rear of the house is now okay.
Okay.
If the variance as proposed does not meet the criteria in your opinion, what about a lesser of a variance? Get them something, setting it back a certain distance from Snyder or something.
My suggestion to cut across there, I was inclined to say if he agreed to that angle,
I would vote to approve, but I think we're we're so far away with these front yards and what the ordinance states for the front yard, a solid fence is,
But well, that's the other piece that didn't, it's a picket fence is what's stated
you know,
as
a
allowable
slatted
for a front
fence.
yard.
But does that give him the privacy? At 6 foot, it would negate people hopping the fence, but how much privacy would he give?
Aaron, any comments?
No, no.
Take a minute, just read this again.
And keep in mind, you have two separate requests here because they're two separate provisions of the ordinance. You have a 6-foot fence up to the front property line on 2 streets. And then you have a specific separate provision that fences not exceed 3 feet within 25 feet of the intersection.
Well, if we go back through these, I think we said it is a new condition, but I think all of us said that it's not the minimum necessary to afford relief. I think it's being in compliance with what the code states is allowed for a fence does not prevent common use necessarily, but it does impact certain flexibilities they have with the property. Special privilege isn't an issue. Self-created hardship is not an issue, and is what they're asking for, consistent with the intent of the ordinance. It doesn't, I think we basically agreed it doesn't seem to be consistent based on location and design and height. So,
Unfortunately, I think we're outside of our authority, really. Granted.
so
Yeah, it doesn't mean every single condition.
any other comments or deliberation you have, or ready for somebody to make a motion? If so, what would you consider the motion to be? A motion for, a motion against?
I would make a motion that we deny the requested variance.
And the reason for the motion to deny is based on combination of being out of compliance with the design requirement, the picket versus slab, and based on the requirements of distance from the street, the height requirement with the distance from the street. Okay. So,
I would agree.
do you want to make a motion?
I think I said I'd make
So,
a motion.
so that's the motion though, that,
Based on your statements.
okay. Anybody second the motion? I would second the motion.
Let's see if somebody else does, because the chair's not supposed to.
Anybody else?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so then everybody that would agree that the motion to deny based on the conditions, so to deny the variance that, as requested based on the fact that it is out of compliance with the design requirements of the fence and based on the fact that it's out of compliance with the placement and height conditions of a fence based on the property having 2 front yards. Everyone that agrees we want to deny the variance, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody that wants to be opposed to that denial? With that, we will deny.
So that's a 4-0.
4-0 that we will deny.
Okay.
So I do have one question. We talked about the administrative item at the beginning being till August 30th. What if there is no submission for August, or do we know that there already will be a submission for August? Do we want to make that date actually be longer, just in case?
do that. I mean, or the alternative is the next time you meet, let's say you don't meet until September, at the beginning of the meeting, you just make a motion to extend it to the end of that meeting.
Okay. With that, if there's no other business, we can
Actually,
adjourn.
well, we do want to talk about those rules of procedure.
Okay.
We just needed to amend them to keep them alive
Okay.
for the purposes of this meeting. So what we have is, we have our adopted rules of procedure. Every once in a blue moon, we will kind of go back and look them over. In April, with the coming of the COVID, we adopted certain emergency rules of procedure to allow for remote meetings, which we did not have prior to that. That is the circumstances under which we and the Board of Planning Commission and the Historic District Commission, all of y'all did this, all three boards. They were specifically written to automatically expire upon 45 days after the mayor rescinds the state of emergency at the city level. Occurred in May. That 45-day period ended in around Independence Day. So technically, anything that was in red on these rules of procedure, walking into your meeting today, were void. But we extended it at the beginning of the meeting to carry it over. So we're fine. Now, the question is, as we're now out of the COVID period, and all of this technology is kind of changing the way business is being done, the question becomes is, what worked, what didn't, what would you like to see continue, what would you like to change? And we're asking each board that because each board has their own kind of unique set of circumstances. So we're not asking one boilerplate fits all for all three boards for their rules. Each one will give us feedback based on their thoughts. Janice could not be here. I told her about this issue, and I'm going to pass around, and I'll read it since Aaron is not here. I'll read it into the record so you can hear her comments. Okay. This is Janice's comments regarding this issue. I am certainly in favor of keeping the Zoom platform, and I, for one, have not yet attended a meeting in a public setting, including the monthly Dolman Museum Board meetings and church services, all on Zoom. With having an option for Zoom, it opens up the opportunity just in case a member cannot get downtown that evening, but can attend it outside of the scope of the area. If this goes away, then there is no option. Finally, on Zoom, there is nothing that I feel I have missed, particularly with the recent continued case, for instance. Still very prepared and comfortable in my thoughts expressed. So I don't need to be physically in the room to do that. I'm not saying that I will never attend in person again, but please keep the option of Zoom available. Those are my thoughts, and thank you. So that's Janice's thoughts. I haven't gotten any feedback from Brian. There's a number of options. Do away with Zoom, or make it readily available to everybody, applicants, board members, or like basically continuing as we have been. Or an alternative is a middle ground, which is to make it available upon request with cause. Like say an applicant is, they've got an attorney and the attorney's in Baltimore, and he wants to Zoom in rather than drive up to a hearing or something like that. Somebody's out of the area. Aaron's here because of some health issues in his house at the moment, which includes him being here, because this allowed him in this particular circumstance. Otherwise, he fully intended to be here this evening. So we wanted to get your feedback so we can craft whatever desired, for lack of better words, permanent revisions to the rules procedure that will not have a drop dead date. It'll just be your standard policy from here on out on how you want to deal with remote meetings. The city, to this point, has been recording everything and putting them on YouTube. I don't see that, regardless of whether people or not Zoom in, I don't see that ending. Frankly, it's a good thing. So if people want to see what you all do, you know, just us throwing it up on YouTube. So don't confuse YouTube with Zoom, because you can record and throw it on YouTube, but not necessarily have Zoom, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So don't equate them essentially as one. But we wanted to get some feedback from you all so we can go back and craft some draft language to have ready for your next meeting for you to look over, and if you're okay with, if it meets your direction that you give us, adopt it, and then that'll be the end of it.
We have to make it available to the public. We do it permanently.
My thought is if you make it available to the, well, let me back up. You don't necessarily have to. I mean, I think it's whatever you decide. I would probably want to check with the city attorney. But if you wanted to, in other words, just make it available to board members and not to the public as a matter of policy, I think you can do that. But I would want to check with the city attorney.
I guess the challenge is right now, anybody could show up here from the public just because they want to see what happens, whether they have a stake in the case or not. And we would be restricting that, which seems challenging. But there's nothing to prevent this information about connecting to Zoom being posted for the public, right? It can be shared with the public through a posting on the signage downstairs. So the public could see it if they wanted to and know they could connect in.
What did we do, what did we do when we were not having on-site meetings? I mean, for the public.
For the public, we required them to Zoom. We weren't allowing them
I
to
mean,
build.
how were they notified?
There's that sheet that we put in your packet that has the login numbers and all that kind of stuff. They would get a copy of that. The legal advertisement would mention if you want to attend by Zoom, to
Okay,
contact our office so we can get you that information.
so the posting would state that.
So there were ways, and we made sure that it was compliant with open meeting laws to make that information available. So anybody who wanted to participate, when we were telling people, you can't come into this building, anybody who wanted to participate could get that information, log on and participate via Zoom.
I don't see any reason why we shouldn't continue like that. I do think there were two challenges with Zoom, though. Obviously, was the one time where the sessions just did not work, could not get it to work, which is a technology failure. And I believe in that case, we talked about making it happen faster, but we ended up waiting, I believe, till the next actual scheduled meeting, did we not?
I'm not following it.
But there's a session we couldn't have, like, we couldn't get it to actually work, right, from the failure. And we said we were going to potentially try to reschedule that for a quicker date, so the applicant didn't have to wait to another whole month.
We did do that, yeah.
Did we
It was-
actually make them wait the whole month or not? Because I know I didn't
I
attend the
think we
next
did a
one.
special meeting. If I remember correctly, we did a special meeting for that. It was like 2 weeks later or something. By the time we could get enough of y'all to have a forum to have a special meeting.
Do we need to call that out and say that we would not necessarily wait to the next meeting? We would try to accommodate a quicker turnaround time? Does that need to be referenced at all?
You could, it's not referenced in the rules of procedure. We kind of winged it on that because of the technology failure. There's nothing specifically in the policy about what happens if the technology fails.
I thought we went to the city attorney and he turned it down. I might be wrong.
Well, I'll check. And what I can do is I can get answers to these questions, email them to you all, and then kind of get, do a group email. You're not deciding cases, so you can give us feedback on how you might want to adjust the rules via that. that measure.
The other challenge that we had, which tonight was when there were things that need to be shown as evidence that are being filtered into the meeting or something we want to reference, it is difficult when I've been on that to sometimes see that. So
Mhm.
That I find to be hard. And I run across that because I staff 3 boards who do this. And I find that to be a real problem. What if somebody shows up, hey, I'm going to enter this into the record, didn't get into the initial thing, or some opponent comes and shows up and they have stuff to hand out, and there's Aaron sitting there at home, he doesn't have access to it.
you'd have to almost have a scanner available, scan it on the fly, and then email it or take a picture of the phone and text it.
Or make note, or provide a notice that if you are going to present any materials, that it be to the planning staff a certain amount of time in advance for distribution.
Okay.
We could do it that way. So, I mean, I think this temporary policy in general work. I think it also caused us to realize what glitches are, such as the issue of the exhibits and things like that, and the technology failures. But in general, it generally worked. So make it available for every meeting, make it available upon request.
I think I think every meeting, it would be a good option.
Okay.
Apparently Janice is not going to be in attendance if we don't make it
Yeah, I think so too, especially as the Delta variant's like starting to pick back up. I think we're going to see more cases. I think you're going to see people that aren't comfortable meeting as much again. Just my opinion.
I mean, the hope is obviously you don't have another pandemic-like event for many decades, but
Right.
maybe, a month, a year, a week, who knows? Right. And most organizations are now doing the dual in-person and or video,
Mhm.
depending on what your situation is. So
Right.
I think,
Mhm.
I think my opinion would be we continue to do what we do, maybe see if there's some way to handle addressing the evidence, make sure people can get, either you bring it, like you said, ahead of time, it's got to be submitted by a certain number of days ahead of time, or is there some ability to, I think all the board meetings are happening in this room, right? Most of
Until
them.
further notice, yeah.
Um,
Well, this board is always met in here.
Yeah,
The planning commission and HDC typically meet up on the fourth floor.
is there an option to have a scanner and send it to somebody? Is that something you would even consider? And,
Or just have a camera and email it from the camera.
Yeah. And I do think open to the public completely, just like it could be today. I think if we didn't, it gives the impression of trying to hide something.
Right. Okay, then what I will do is, based on what I heard here tonight, I will work up some revisions to the rules of procedure. And that'll be the first thing on your agenda next time you meet, whether it's August or September. You may end up having a case in August or somebody who's got a pool wanting one in a pool in a corner lot wanting variance.
Oh,
So
An existing pool?
they started putting it up.
Mm.
With that, unless any other further business, we can adjourn.
Sounds like it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks.
oh my, I really hated not to approve that, but I don't see how we